Thanks, Paul. Okay, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of staff and any public that happen to be listening. It's Thursday the 25th of January. It's the Overview and Scrutiny Committee's turn to have a meeting. And first of all, I'll go through the emergency evacuation procedure, which is if there's anything that happens here, you just see me disappear rather quickly. And I presume that you all were similar. So don't wait for anybody or don't excuse yourself. If there's something happens, just go. We'll do the excuses after that. Apologies for absence, have we any?
We don't have any apologies from committee members, Chair, but we do have apologies from Gareth, the external auditor, who has given apologies for this evening.
Right, thank you. We're on minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November 2020, pages 3 to 6. And I'd like someone to propose that we accept these minutes or make amendments or any other adjustments that are considered necessary.
Happy to propose them, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Been proposed and seconded that we accept these minutes, and I will duly sign them in a moment. Thank you.
If we can vote on that, Chair, if I read out a roll call in alphabetical order, if you can say for, against or abstain, members, please. Councillor Brackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor Keel we don't have. Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
For.
Councillor Rain?
For.
Councillor Raper?
For.
And we don't have Councillor Wass currently. But that is 8 votes for, Chair.
Thank you very much. Accepted. I have no urgent business, so we're on item 5, which is declarations of interest. I have none. Has any other member got a declaration of interest for the agenda tonight? Well, carry on.
I've got none, John.
No raised hands,
I didn't think anybody would have as such. No raised hands that I can see either. So, no declarations. So we're on to Part A, items, matters to be dealt with under delegated powers. And it's item 6. It's the external audit annual fee letter, pages 7 to 22.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I'll take this. And good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Anson.
So this is, as the name says, this is an annual letter we need to do as part of, our audit process. And it's sort of support the 1920 audit year we completed in end of November. So there are 3 key documents in the audit process. One is the audit plan. The second one is the audit finding report, which Gareth and myself presented to this committee in October, and this is the final one, Chair. So I'll take this as read because this summarizes, pretty much what we reported to this committee in October, and this is a regulatory requirement that by our audit code that we need to report to you as an annual audit letter every year. But I'll summarize in terms of a couple of pages in this document. If I take to page 9 and 10, Chair, on page 9 of the pack, the key messages are, we gave an unqualified audit opinion of Ryedale Council on the 30th of November, and we gave an unqualified value for money conclusion on the same date. And on the same date, we closed this audit because the whole of government accounts that we need to report to the National Audit Office was also reported because Ryedale is below the threshold in terms of detailed audit procedures. So page 9 and page 10. Page 10 covers the key, audit certificate. So in the audit opinion we issued on the 30th of November, which was published in your website, includes that certificate that we have closed audit. So those are the key messages. I'm not, anticipating to go through every page of this document because this is what Gareth and myself presented back in October, but I'm very happy to take any questions. But last but not least, I'll go through the last page, which is page page 14, which talks about audit fees. So if you may recall, Chair, when you reported in October, we said that the final audit fee is to be confirmed. But before that audit committee and when we finalized our audit finding report, we discussed potential increase to the audit fee with Anton and how much that could be roughly. But since we now concluded the audit, we can finalize that audit fee which is reported in here. And on the right hand side of the table on page 14, gives some explanations of why this has changed to our plan audit fee which we reported to you in January last year. So all in all, it's about 7,000 more. And what's another key message on this is we don't approve this. It will be approved by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. So that's we tell them that we have discussed with the Section 151 officer and it's up to them to agree or disagree on that. But that's the final audit fee we confirmed in the annual audit letter. So other than that, Chair, the rest of this report is everything we reported in October in terms of value for money conclusion and other risks we identified in the audit. And this is a statutory requirement, so we present this to this committee as the final sort of report for 1920 audit process cycle. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, now. You're on mute, Chair.
Chair, you're mute.
Has any members got any questions, please? Because I have none.
No, I've got none.
There's no raised hands, Chair, but we just need to record that we've received and noted the report.
Well, I'll propose that we receive this report. I'd like that seconded, please.
Yes, I second it. John.
Thank you, David.
Okay, so if we can vote for, against or to abstain. Councillor Blackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor King? Councillor King?
For.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
For.
Councillor Rain?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Raper?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. We move on to the next item then, which is item 7, the second internal audit and counter fraud progress report on pages 23 on and thereon.
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan and I will take this one. The report's divided into two, so it's an internal audit progress report
for a while doing that,
and a counter fraud progress report. So I'll initially start off by providing the background and the position on internal audit, and then I'll hand over to Jonathan, and he'll give you the latest of the counter fraud position.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So the background to this report, it's the first progress report since we finalised and approved the audit plan at the last meeting of this the committee back in October 2020. Since then, we've started 5 audits and we've moved one further audit to draft stage that was actually part of the 1920 plan but was outstanding. As the committee is aware, our usual or typical routine work was suspended during the sort of the initial lockdown, and we reprioritised and refocused audit resource onto providing guidance around counter fraud measures, fraud risks, supply relief, and ad hoc support and advice around business grants, etc., and changed control environment that was in place at the council at the time. Ultimately, that did mean it wasn't until October that we could present a high-level internal audit plan to yourselves for approval. Since then, we've been working hard alongside officers to finalise the details of the audit work to be undertaken this year. Clearly, the council has been operating in very, very difficult circumstances, and there are many ongoing pressures that the council's facing. And that's made it at times difficult for council officers to be able to fully engage in the audit process, as they've had to reprioritise the ongoing businesses as usual and exceptional items of business as well. We have agreed an outline schedule for completing items in the plan, but realistically, we have to take it, be pragmatic in for the remainder of the year. We do have the full support of Strategic Management Board and in our delivery of the internal audit work as far as they're able to during the remainder of the year. But it's recognised that because the response to COVID-19, those efforts and very much other business priorities are still ongoing, it's likely that some of the timescales for audits will slip and slip further. So, as the committee may or may not be aware, but the internal audit opinion can only really take account of the work that we've done in the year, as well as other sources of assurance. So it's likely that if work does slip any further, that there will be a limitation of scope that we'll be providing at the end of the year for 2020-21. This shouldn't be confused with an adverse opinion where we have enough assurance but are perhaps raising weaknesses around risk management, governance, internal control. It's purely around our ability to form an opinion in line with the public sector internal audit standards. But what we have agreed to do is to kind of prioritise areas of greatest risk between now and the end of the year, and try and where we can focus our efforts and resources on those areas to best support the council through what is clearly a difficult time. And any outstanding priorities or areas of work which we were not able to complete in the 2020-21 plan, we'll look to consider for the 21-22 plan. And before I hand over to Jonathan, Anton, I wonder if you might want to comment on any aspect of this report.
Yes, I'd like to, if I may, Chair. Thank you. It's really just to, I suppose, reiterate some of the things that Connor has said. So I'm grateful for Connor's words and understanding. I think we just need to be open about this. This past year has been a very, very odd, abnormal year, and that's impacting right on all areas of business. And we'd be doing ourselves. We'd be remiss really if we pretended it was otherwise. So we haven't been able to do all we wanted to do in terms of the internal audit plan. Indeed, we didn't even agree an internal audit plan until October. So we're only kind of looking at the last 6 months of the financial year anyway. And I think perhaps a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, we probably hoped that by now things were starting to get back to normal. And as I've said in the budget briefings that we've had, actually that's not happened, and it's likely to continue, isn't it, over the next few months. So again, just being upfront, being realistic, we've had some good conversations between us, management board, and with Connor, in terms of just ensuring our expectations are right. But as Connor says, it's not about giving us an adverse opinion. We'll just have to be upfront in terms of saying what we have managed to audit or not. But I am grateful for the fact that we have
is now joining.
we have collectively managed to reprioritize, because that's it, isn't it? When things are going awry and you've got limited resources, you prioritize, and this will feed into the later discussion as well about the audit plan going forward. Things are not going to return to normal for some time. That means that the work that we do is not what we would normally be doing. Veritao have been very helpful in helping us with assurance on things like these business grants. They're going to prioritise things like the COVID trackers that we have to ensure that we're doing that properly in terms of recording all of our costs rather. So timescales will slip, and they'll slip into the new financial year as well. But it could be that actually this year's audit plan slips into next financial year too. Normally we would report back to you in July in terms of how this has gone. That may even slip as well. We just don't know. So apologies, that's quite a long ramble, but it's really just to say, let's be upfront about this. Let's put it on the record that we know this is not typical, and we need to react to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anton, but I don't think you've rambled as such, but you've given us a deal of information to absorb. And also to you, Conrad, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I can have sorry, Chair,
question before we get too far on the counter fraud. I presume most of this will be done through electronic means more than filling out pieces of paper. How widespread is this? Is it a big problem for a lot of councils, or is it finally focused on to vulnerable areas?
Fraud is a big problem in the grant system that have come out through government, and a number of councils that I'm aware of have lost significant amounts of government grants. Now, I'm pleased to say that Ryedale has kept a tight ship. We have identified fraud. We've investigated. In the progress report, we point to £30,000 of fraud that's been prevented, and we have ongoing investigations into false applications currently. After this, we're looking at post-payment assurance. So we're going to go back and give a very detailed look at a sample of all the payments that have been made, and we may find more. We may not find any. But I think ourselves and the council are both committed to making sure that the right people get these fundings and not the wrong people. Unfortunately, these grants have been targeted by organised crime, and these people are experts at trying to evade all the systems that we have put in place to prevent that happening. And some of these gangs operate internationally. Some operate nationally within the UK. And unfortunately, there are local people or businesses who have falsely or erroneously applied for grants and received them or not received them. So there's a whole gamut of issues in grant payments. If that answers the question, Chair.
Want to get the button to work properly? It does. Thank you, Jonathan. Much obliged for that. I've got Councillor Rain. You've got your hand raised for a question.
Yes, thank you. Do forgive me for not actually knowing this, but I just wondered: are the same people that do the internal audit? Are they the same people that do the counter fraud? And it mentions the team, and I hope you don't mind, but can I just ask, like, how many are on the team, and if they're two separate?
The counter fraud and internal audit have separate teams. In the team I manage, we work for 9 authorities, and there's about 17 people in my team, and we're actually one of the largest counter fraud teams working within local government. Connor has his own team of people as well, and Connor, maybe you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, so we have a fairly large internal audit team, numbering over 30, close to 40 people. We have officers who are more sort of versed in the ways and workings of Ryedale, who tend to pick up that work, and it's supplemented by expertise as and needed to fulfil the assurance requirements of the plan.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's over 50 people that we've got on counter fraud from my adding up so far, 50 plus. It's heartening to hear. So, you know, in this day and age where electronic means can be used and utilised so easily, it's good to know. So thank you for that report.
Chair, Councillor
if anybody
Oxley
else
has
has any
his
questions,
hand raised.
Councillor Oxley, you've got your hand up, you just seen. Councillor Oxley.
Sorry, Chair. Had Connor finished his part before we moved on to counter fraud, or have we sort of jumped between the two? Or am I just misunderstanding the reports?
We haven't jumped anywhere, no. It was part and parcel of internal audit.
Yeah, I appreciate it's part of internal audit. I just thought they were going to be discussed as two separate reports. Sorry, it's my misunderstanding. No problem.
Yes, it can get confusing because we've got an awful lot of information here to digest, and it has taken some digesting at times. And I've been at it and gone away and come back and tried again and still get my brain into it. But we've got experts with us to clarify if we're a little bit woolly on what it actually means. And you've got plenty of people to ask the question from. And if any member does have a problem in that regard, you know, ask somebody. It's simpler. Anybody else got any points that they want to raise at this particular juncture? Because I don't want to move on any further than without people being comfortable in accepting this report.
Chair, Jonathan does have the counter fraud framework update report to present as part of this as well.
It does. And it's later on, isn't it? Oh, no, it's item 8. It's the next item.
I'm happy to proceed, Chair, if you wish.
Chair, if
yes,
you'd rather we vote on this report before we move on to the
I'd rather we vote on this one first.
That's fine.
Yes, if we take this
okay.
and then we'll go on to item 8 because it is part of item 7 that we've just been taking.
So members,
we'll take item 7.
The recommendation we're voting on this report is that we note the work undertaken by internal audit and the counter fraud team in the year to date. So for, against or abstention, Councillor Brackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
I'm going to abstain because I'm still not convinced that I've got my ordering right in this. I thought we should have had the counter fraud document presented to us, but so I'll abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rain?
For.
Councillor Raper?
For.
And I believe we have Councillor Wass now.
For.
Thank you.
Welcome,
that
Councillor
is
Wass.
8 votes for, Chair, and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8 in that sense, which is a counter fraud framework update, pages 37 to 102. If you were to come back then, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. This is an annual report that we do every year, and we start by talking about the national picture. And as we've just been discussing, COVID-19 grant fraud has kind of dominated the work for not only my team, but counter fraud professionals around the country. I won't go into any more detail on that, but I would like to raise the issue of cybercrime. Kaspersky released a report in late 2019 that identified that cyber criminals or hackers were targeting local governments, not just within the UK, but in the United States and worldwide. I don't know if you're aware of the incident at Redcar Cleveland Borough Council that occurred last March and April. The council was the victim of a ransomware attack, and that's where systems are taken down by hackers, and they try and extort money from a council to put those systems back online. The council correctly did not engage with the criminals who were trying to extort them. However, they lost access to their systems for many months. And this obviously was a disruption for members of staff as well as the public. The cost is estimated to be over £10 million to that council. I'd also like to mention Hackney Council. After the report was drafted, I became aware that they were also hacked in October of 2020. And it was reported a couple of weeks ago that hackers had taken a lot of the documentation that they'd seized from council systems and released them onto the dark web. So cybercrime is an issue for local government, and we're kind of highlighting it as a risk. The report also reviews the council's fraud framework. So last April, a new national strategy for local government was released. And I've included that for reference in Appendix 1 of this quite lengthy report. As a result of the new national strategy being released, we've created a new Ryedale counter-fraud strategy. And that's in Appendix 2, and it confirms Ryedale's commitment to stopping fraud and taking strong action where required. Appendix 3 contains the annual fraud risk assessment update. That includes a lot of stuff that's relevant to this year, which is the effect of COVID-19 on fraud. And it's not just business grants. A number of areas have been affected, and the risks have increased in areas. Finally, we've refreshed and updated the council's counter-fraud and corruption policy. It was last updated in 2016, so it was a good time to do this. It's mainly been updated to reflect new guidance by the Attorney General, and this is about how cases are taken to court and changes to the process of prosecuting people, especially when that occurs in Crown Court. So that is the Counter-Fraud Framework Update Report and the 4 appendices. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any members got a question? I've seen no raised hands at the present time. Councillor Oxley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just picking up on your last point there, in terms of the link between finding fraud and prosecution, how does that happen with the situations where we've found fraud already?
Do you mean in general how are prosecutions taken forward within the council?
I mean, do we always prosecute? Is it part of the policy? Are there financial limits? I probably ought to know the answer, Jonathan, but I don't.
No, and I'm happy to explain the process. We don't prosecute everybody. To be honest, not everybody is deserving of a prosecution. There's many reasons why people commit fraud, many circumstances, and part of our job is to speak to these people, evaluate their reasons, evaluate the evidence that we have. And I hope that in the course of my career that we've prosecuted the people who should have been prosecuted. Are there financial limits? I would say technically not. There's none in the policy. However, court action can be costly, and if somebody has defrauded the council of £10, it doesn't make much sense to prosecute them at a cost of £800 or whatever, however much it might cost. But equally, sometimes the council hasn't made a loss but wishes to make a statement about fraud. So nothing is particularly ruled out. And I think that the council makes the right decisions. We make recommendations. The council makes decisions on these matters.
Thank you. That helps me enormously. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Rain, you've got your hand.
Thank you. Just going through reading this, which I did again this afternoon, what just sprung to my mind was the training, sort of how much training is actually given to, the Ryedale members, staff and so on, before, so that they can pick up that there's fraud happening before they bring yourselves in. I'm just interested in that, as in with it being so, nowadays the fraud is so terrible. I'm just wondering, has more training been organised, or has there been, is there going to be more training for the people at Ryedale to be able to spot the fraud?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. Every year in our work plan, we look to give fraud awareness training to different parts of the council, and some of it is general fraud awareness. Some of it is very specific to the areas that we want to target. So, for example, with the government grants, well, we might want to give training specifically to the officers that do that. I think that as a fraud team, we can't stop fraud or prevent it without the help of all of the officers who work at Ryedale District Council. I see ourselves as intertwined with them, and we receive reports from the public of fraud, but equally some of the best referrals that we get are suspicions by members of staff. Sometimes it's a nagging doubt, sometimes they're convinced fraud is occurring. We look at all instances that are reported, and the training sessions that we give support them in giving them the confidence to report it and giving them the indicators of the things that they should look out for in the course of their work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rain. Anybody else wishing to make any comments or ask a question?
Yes, Chair.
In that case, yeah, carry on, Councillor Ross.
Yeah, I'm just intrigued about Cleveland and the Hackney Council problems that you highlighted in your example. If there's an encryption system, and often these things are sort of 5-tier systems, other than somebody inside helping people to commit fraud, how do they go about, the criminals that do this, how do they go about accessing this remotely?
So, most computer systems these days are accessible through the internet. And how do they hack your systems? I'm not a cyber security expert. However, I can give you some examples. Sometimes it can be an email sent and that's not legitimate. I'm sure all of us receive those emails every day. The hackers are getting better and better at sending emails that people want to click on, and the information that comes with that email can infect your system. No matter how good you are in terms of cybersecurity, the risk is always there because they're trying to be one step ahead of us, and we're trying to be one step ahead of them. But I'll give you an example of another council, which I won't name, but in that situation, a member of staff walked outside of their office and they found a USB stick, and on it was printed the logo of the council. And they took it inside and said, somebody's obviously dropped a USB stick. Let's stick it in the system and see what's there. They did. It infected their system and it caused widespread damage. That's how clever some of these people are. Now, how a council reacts to a cybercrime occurring is probably a good thing to focus on. Certainly in the fraud awareness sessions that I mentioned to Councillor Rain, we always raise cybercrime and we always try and urge caution to staff and give them information to try and stop it. But there's many, many different ways of being hacked. If that I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I appreciate that, but it just seems to be the most obvious route in where things can occur that are unbeknown to people who have been trained, obviously, what to look out for in terms of the council and their officers.
Yes, I think, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watt, and thank you for that reply. It is fairly easy to trick people on occasion, especially if they're not concentrating or thinking about that this particular aspect in that particular way. It's some people are gullible and some are not so gullible, and some people are not gullible, and you have variation thereof, and that's humanity for you. I think we can move on slightly. We have to take that as a vote now, don't we, and accept that particular agenda item.
Yes, please, Chair.
So we'll go to the vote, if we will, please.
Have we moved that and seconded that?
Well, I'll move it formally then, and I'm looking for a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the vote. Councillor Brackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
For.
Councillor Rain?
For.
Councillor Raper?
For.
And Councillor Wass?
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Item 9 on our list tonight is Internal Audit Plan 21 and 2022. It's a consultation document, page 103 to 108.
Thank you, Chair. That's one for me to take.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just by way of introduction, so every year internal audit is required to produce a risk-based internal audit plan. If you recall from my previous item, that was the plan that was approved back in the October meeting of this committee. This plan needs to be based on an assessment of risk, but it's also informed by a number of other factors, relevant national issues, our knowledge and expertise in relation to risk and control, any recent audit work we've done across our client network, just some of those examples there. Now, clearly, drawing up a draft plan is quite an involved process, and it starts off with very much us looking at these key risk areas, which are set out at 6.3. So looking at the strategic level, looking at risks which might cut across services, those systems which carry an amount of inherent risk because of the level of and value of transactions that they process, and then all the way down to specific service area reviews, technical and project reviews, and keeping an eye on issues around value for money and efficiency. However, in doing that, we do need to take account of the expectations and the requirements and the thoughts of senior management, but also this committee, and it's actually enshrined in the internal audit charter that we have between ourselves and Ryedale District Council, that we take the views of the committee and senior management in forming the plans and in considering areas for priority for the coming year. So currently we're at the stage of doing initial planning work for 2021-22. Now, clearly, you've been made aware of the difficulties with the current year's plan, so we will be factoring any sort of deferred work or work that slips into next year's plan to make sure that if it's still a priority area, that we cover it and we give it due attention that it deserves. Also, clearly, the council is operating in an external environment which is extremely difficult. We don't need to labour the point around COVID-19 anymore, but then there's local government reorganisation and post-Brexit issues that are on the horizon that need to be borne in mind. We have set out an initial list of priorities that this committee may wish to discuss and prompt and challenge further. But really the purpose of this report is to seek the views of this committee on what you believe to be the key risks facing the council and any areas you feel would be beneficial to prioritise what is a limited internal audit resource in providing sort of the best assurances for the council for the year ahead. We have provided at table 1 a list of those possible areas. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but there are a fair number of areas split up into sections which equate almost to 6.3. So you can try and understand what those key areas are, and in some cases we've expanded within some brackets to indicate what we might focus on specifically. So really we're just seeking any kind of views or comments from committee, and happy to take any questions as well at this point in time.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wren, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind me asking you, on page 106, your actual table, is this in any particular order? I'm just interested who decides which priority, which order to start things with. My concern is just looking at other areas. Climate change is right at the bottom, and I'd just like to know that. Is that the order of priority, or is it just the way it's been written in the table?
No, thank you for your question. There's certainly in respect of how it's been laid out, it's more of how it appears. It's not an order. It's not suggestive of a priority. As I explained a little bit earlier, the sections around section 6.3, paragraph section 6.3 on the areas that are key for prioritising audit resource. That's how the table is split up. But within those, there's no real order in terms of priority. Clearly, if you look at strategic risks, corporate and cross-cutting, if you could take the view that a lot of risk resides in those areas, so you might well take a few more from that particular part of the table. But yeah, there's no kind of suggestion of priority based on the ordering of the bullets there.
Thank you. May I just ask if it's possible, who actually does make the decision on the priorities?
I suppose they never get given a formal priority. It's we would come with a long list, perhaps not quite as long as this, in terms of our sort of internal liaison with Strategic Management Board and with Anton through client liaison. But we'd also be seeking the views of yourselves. So if you were to suggest some areas for inclusion, and we felt there was genuine merit in doing that work, then that would be also part of that consideration as well. So they don't get ranked as such. It's more about using that intelligence from within the council itself, and also those sources that I referred to earlier, that in the wider sphere, as to how we put that plan together. Right. And clearly an important point to make is that the plan is never fixed. Change should be seen as a good thing in this context. So actually, if we set up we present the plan to you in April, it might look significantly different in terms of what we delivered by the end of the following year, because we've moved audits in and out as the council's priorities has changed, and that's crucial in terms of providing a responsive service that's meets the needs of the council. So just to make that point, really, that if there is change, it's a good thing. It shouldn't be seen as a bad thing.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would like to butt in here, if I may, quickly, and say that the responsibility lies with us as members, and I think we would have to be the ones that gave a steer as to what the priority list in numerical terms as to what's first, second and third, etc., should be somewhat under recommendation from officer report hours. Councillor Oxley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's been a very strange and difficult year, as everybody referenced. That will have had huge implications on all sorts of things to do with our staff and the people who work for us. I would just want to wave a flag that says, as we're looking forward, I think it is absolutely vital that all the issues that are to do with staff, whether it's training, whether it's the HR policies, whether or not it's the way the performance management scheme works, I think all those things should justify specific and particular attention in the next 12 months, just to see what impact the quite horrible time they've had this year might have had on any of those. Just a personal view, but I'd like to sort of air it.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. We can certainly take that into consideration, and I don't disagree that with the difficulties of the year, those particular risks around, HR, organisational development, training, staff well-being, health and safety, become heightened, the risks around those areas. So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Oxley, and thank you for the reply, Connor. I would concur with both the question and the reply. I did have sort of a question, but I think it can keep for another time. But
I have a question, Chair.
Yes, carry on, Councillor Ross.
I know from looking at other reports that are on the agenda with the problems, obviously, as Councillor Oxley mentioned and the officer mentioned to begin with about COVID, but a lot of the auditing that's gone on this year is either on hold or limited because obviously of the accessibility of the information that's required has not been there. I'm just wondering to ask the officer if he could actually glean a little bit of information from us, from his professional point of view, as to which areas really are a key worry in terms of getting things in place or putting rather things back on track from these lists, even though I know they're not exhaustive lists. But I think we aren't trained, and I agree with what Councillor Oxley said in terms of the ones that he highlighted seem quite sensible to do. But I do think we need a little bit of help from the officer about where he might think, we are struggling in certain areas unbeknown to us, and it's not evident in this report.
Thank you, Councillor. And if I could let Anton initially speak to that, if that's okay.
Thanks for that, Connor. And I've been listening to the conversation. It's been really interesting. When we were putting this report together, we did have a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves as to whether, in fact, it was the right time to bring it. We would normally bring this to you in January as the kind of first stab, and it wasn't about not involving members. It was more about, as I said earlier, we're only kind of 4 months into the current year of audits, and we're still in very uncertain times, etc. So we did have that discussion. I think the question around prioritisation that Councillor Rain raised was useful as well, because although we don't prioritise at this stage, or we haven't in terms of the plan, when we have discussions about areas of work, we do kind of look at what areas need prioritisation. And as I said earlier, in current circumstances, prioritisation is really important because, frankly, we just can't do everything we would normally be doing. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about other officers who are involved in the day-to-day dealing with COVID and things like flooding, for example. So I think we do take the prioritisation seriously. I think the main point I'd like to make is in terms of the plan as it is. It's useful to get your views and your input. I have certain uneasiness about the list, that it is a very much all-encompassing list that includes everything, and that's a good starting point. But what I would say is that this will come back to you again in possibly in April time, when we've seen what the impact has been on this current year's plan, what things we've not managed to do. But probably more importantly, how the world looks. It is very different, and things that have kind of automatically gone into audit plans in the past, I think we will reflect on those. A very, very simple example, and it's a very basic example, is our information governance, where Veritas provide a useful check on our security within our offices, that there's no papers lying around, and that people don't have books with their passwords on, that kind of thing. And of course, that's just not relevant today, well, not to the same extent anyway. So a very, very simple example, but I think it proves the point. So I would say that it will come back to you more refined, more kind of updated. Always happy to take your views, but I think when we do that, in reply to the last question, we need to be a bit more specific in terms of where the world is. It is a management audit plan, so we jointly work with internal audit to produce this, and it needs to reflect those concerns that management has. And when I say management, that includes members as well. So again, sorry, I've rambled a bit. It's been a long day, but hope that kind of gives you a flavour of where we are. Very different years, very different year, very different circumstances, and it will come back to you in future with a bit more detail.
Thanks, Anton. If I
could, Anton, sorry.
Go on.
Carry on.
Just in not so much to do with this, but your general auditing that you're doing internally. How are you actually focusing the work onto your staff when so many are working remotely and getting the data and information accessible for them to work on? Because obviously I know a lot is ongoing or put on hold. How are you working to rationalise that and to make sure everything is being covered where it does need to be covered?
I'll give a quick view, and then it'd be useful to get Connor's experience of this as well. I think we're all learning. We're learning how to do things differently, and learning not just as a one-off experience. I think what we want to do is look at to see. I hesitate to say this, but have there been any benefits of the past 12 months in terms of working practices? A lot of our data is electronic anyway. A lot of our records are electronic, so that we can continue to share those. And with Teams and Skype and so on, we're not seeing people in the flesh, but we're still having conversations. I'm probably having more conversations than I had with people before, actually. I miss the drive down to Ryedale. just a bit of a break, frankly. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit unprofessional. I'll hand over to Connor before I say anything that gets me into trouble.
Thanks, Anton.
Thank you, Anton. I'd echo what you'd say there. It's really a kind of a demonstration of the power of technology. Almost, it's I wouldn't say that it's necessarily been seamless, but it has, in terms through various platforms for video conferencing and secure email exchange. We've been able to maintain the same kind of level of service that we would have done if we were in person. We can replicate a lot of our on-site testing, where through questioning with and some meetings with staff that we can hold over video conferencing. And as Anton said, the council's records are almost exclusively electronic, and we're able to request reports, etc., have access to systems directly in some cases to make sure that we're still providing a service which has integrity and provides assurance in the right areas.
Yeah, but I think it's also important for us to know that as councillors, in terms of prioritising, what can be prioritised in terms of how you're working as well as a team.
Absolutely.
That was a good question, Councillor. Right. Any other body want to ask a question? No, I've got an itch that they want to have it cumulatively scratched. If not, we'll go to accepting this particular report. I'll propose that we accept that report. I'll look for a second.
I second it, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to vote then. Councillor Brackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
For.
Councillor Rain?
For.
Councillor Raper?
For.
Councillor Wass?
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. We move to item 10 on our list, an update on the use of RIPA. Who's going to have the delight of presenting this one to us?
That's me. Thank you, Chair.
That's Anna. Yes, thank you, Simon. Carry on.
Good evening, members. This report is an annual report which comes to overview and scrutiny, acting as the Council's audit committee once a year. Members will be aware of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which gives the Council some provisions with safeguards to use covert surveillance if and when it needs to, and we're obliged to report on that once a year to yourselves as the audit committee. This report sets out the processes involved, but it is essentially a nil return because we've not made any applications during the past year to use the covert surveillance powers that are provided under the Act. And members who've been here on this committee a number of years will know, in fact, over a past number of years, we've not needed to make applications to use those powers. I'm happy to take any questions on the report, but the recommendation is to note the situation over the past 12 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Rain, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, Simon, just for my own curiosity. How serious does something have to be? Is there some kind of table you can go to before you actually do anything? That's my first question. And the other one is, in 9.1, about the Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, are we still sticking with the European Convention, or have we got a UK version of human rights? I just wondered because of Brexit. But I'm just curious as to how serious before anything's, who makes that decision?
Thank you. If I answer the second part of the question first, the European Convention on Human Rights is separate to the European Union. So my understanding is that still applies despite Brexit and developments in that area. As the Act that this report is about is really all about protecting human rights. And that's why there's an onus on any local authority who wants to undertake covert surveillance to prove that it is necessary and proportionate. And there's a two-part process involving senior managers authorising applications and then magistrates considering them to make sure there's proper safeguards in place. So in answer to sort of how serious would a matter be before we'd look to use this, we've obviously been able to deal with the enforcement matters we were responsible for day to day, things like planning, environmental health, some of the community teams functions as well, without recourse to this. This would be a last resort, and often there's other courses of action or other forms of surveillance or monitoring that can take place without needing to use the covert surveillance that falls within this Act.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Would I be right in saying that and this will stay as is until the government repeal or replace this particular Act that we're currently working on, that supersedes what the European Union's usually using and what we're obliged to use from being a member? It will be at some point the House of Commons will make a new law, I'm assuming.
I think, Chair, just to clarify that, the actual European Convention on Human Rights is separate to EU legislation. So that, as I understand, were as a country linked up to indefinitely at the moment. The actual Act of Parliament about use of regulatory powers, that will continue to be enforced until the government either repeals or replaces it, and no doubt there'll be some further provisions if that was ever to happen.
And at the present time, they've got their hands full with other things to be going on and doing the housework, as it were. A question I've got is, do we use private investigators at all in the covert side of what you suggested on this document?
Because we've not undertaken any covert surveillance, the answer is no, we've not used any investigators of any sort. We've, pursued enforcement action by other methods and not used the powers that are set out in this particular Act.
Oh, we'll go historically. Have we ever used?
Not that I'm aware of. We've not used powers under this Act for a long time, as the report sets out. So, as far as I'm aware, that's not happened.
Thank you, Simon. Very good of you. Any other members got questions or anything that's bugging them? Otherwise, I will propose that we accept this agenda item. I'm looking for a second there that we noticed.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go
to the vote, please.
Yes, Chair. Councillor Braxton.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore.
For.
Councillor King.
For.
Councillor Middleton.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
For.
Councillor Rain.
For.
Councillor Raper.
For.
Councillor Wass.
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Next is the item 11, overview and scrutiny forward plan on page 115 and 116. Gone halfway through this plan already in date time. As such, so it's therefore comment from members. Has any member got any comment on the forward plan? And do we need any subtractions or additions? Over to you. You're all very quiet. Are we going to accept it as is? Because I propose that we do. Looking for seconding.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Middleton. We'll go up to vote on that, Chair. Councillor Braxton.
Thank you.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore.
For.
Councillor King.
For.
Councillor Middleton.
For.
Councillor Oxley.
For.
Councillor Rain.
For.
Councillor Raper.
For.
Councillor Wass.
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. We now move on to part B item, matter referred to council. And item 12, Treasury Management Statement and Investment Strategy 21-22, pages 117 to 154. And this one is going to go to the P&R Committee, so we're only going to note that we've seen this document tonight. So that's as far as our interest will be. It's going to go to P&R and then on to council, just for your information. Who's good to present this one tonight? Anton, it's yours, I believe.
It is, yes. Yes, thank you for that. And it does go through P&R and then on to council, but always happy to bring it to the audit committee just to sort of first sight. And really, I suppose the main message today is that this will be the Treasury Management Strategy for the new financial year, the next financial year. Nothing significant is being changed or proposed in this compared with previous years. A couple of things just to highlight. We have talked in the past about this so-called sweeping arrangement, which is a grand name for effectively putting all of our money in alongside other councils to see if that gives us a better rate of return. We still don't have the right assurance in terms of in terms of doing that. So we're not proposing that. So we will remain sort of independent for now. The other thing to say, I think I said anyway at the last time when we looked at this, investment income has been hit by low interest rates compared with what we thought might happen. That will continue into the next financial year. The final figures in this report, the figures in this report will change because they need to be in line with the budget as it's presented to P&R. So the actual figures themselves will change to reflect that, to make sure they marry up. And again, as members will know from briefings and previous reports, we will be using some of our reserves, like many councils, to balance the budget next year. And as we use our reserves, the amount of money that we can make some interest on reduces. and therefore that has a further hit on that. So that's it really. It's a big paper, but there's nothing particularly of note in terms of any changes or change proposals. And final figures will come to, the figures will be updated for the final report that goes to PNR and then on to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Any members got a question? I've got no raised hands at the present time. Any further information that you want?
Yes, please.
Yes, carry on.
Yeah, it's just to do with the operational borrowing on the first page there, page 117, 21, Roman numerals 2, the operational borrowing, 7 million, and the authorised borrowing limit is 12.5 million. And I understand from reading a bit further on that we need to have sort of liquidity to be able to spend quickly. So am I right in assuming that we've got 5.5 million kind of to play with there?
These are the two rates that kind of set our limits, whether we actually go up to them. In fact, we're not doing any new borrowing at the moment because we have significant reserves. So we have £15 million in reserves at the moment. So unless in a couple of weeks' time, PNR and then Council a couple of weeks afterwards decides to invest massively in some capital programs, I'm not expecting us to be looking for any new borrowing. So these are just setting out limits as recommended, but actually we won't hit them.
And 0.613, it mentions that we pay interest on the debt, which has long-term implications.
Yeah.
And is that debt part of or separate to the general fund capital?
So I just lost a bit in the end, but I think what you were asking was about that debt. So that debt is due to kind of long-term commitments that we'd entered into that we can't change. And that is a charge to the revenue account. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's part of or separate to the general fund capital, which is on page 124. It's outlined there.
I've got different pages. It'll be part of it is part of the general fund. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. There's a bit later on, Anton, as well, where you mention provision to members of schedule of all non-treasury investments, including material investments in subsidiaries. And you mentioned joint ventures, and you mention it later on. Is that joint ventures across other councils, or what is it?
Yeah, it could be joint ventures with other councils, mainly. It could be with other bodies, effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah. Councillor Braxton, you've got your hand raised.
Hi, Anton. Yeah, you're probably sick of me bringing this up constantly, but I just wondered where the credit union suggestion was going to fit in all of this.
Yeah, that's fine. I was prepared for it. It will be in the budget report that comes to PNR. Council passed a motion in December, was it, requesting a paper to invest £500,000 with a credit union. So there will be a proposal that we're just kind of finalising, but I can kind of I suppose it's not breaking any secrecy, but we will be proposing 500,000 is identified from within reserves to put into a credit union. There'll be a bit more work to do after that in terms of, actually I think I said it at the budget briefing a couple of weeks ago, there will still be a bit more work in terms of due diligence and which credit union and so on. But in the budget, we will put a proposal to set aside some money, and then members will take a view in that.
That's great news. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Anton. Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll. I'll move forward that we accept and propose that we accept this and to note this report. I'm looking for a seconder.
Second it, John.
Thank you, David.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chair.
Tad.
Councillor Brackstone?
For.
Councillor Cousins?
For.
Councillor Garbutt-Moore?
For.
Councillor King?
For.
Councillor Middleton?
For.
Councillor Oxley?
For.
Councillor Rain?
For.
Councillor Raper?
For.
And Councillor Wass?
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. I have no other urgent business I consider we need to spend our time on. So thank you for an interesting evening. And we've got through a huge amount of reading to get to this point, and it's not taken us that long, really, when we come to think about it. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. And I hope our listeners have, if we have any.
Yeah.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you next time.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Remember, keep safe.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, John. Bye.
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 Paul, can you just confirm when the live stream has stopped, please?
Is now exiting.